Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 13. We looked last unit at types of disorders. This unit, we're going to look at therapies for those disorders so we can see ways that we want to treat them, get people help, as you can see in this clip art. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about, let me back out here, is insight therapies. So these ask you to have insight as to what's going on inside your head, what your problems are. So these are talk therapies. And in fact, Mr. Davis in the next video is going to talk about behavior therapies. These are how do we change your behavior. This is talking. This, we go back to Freud from chapter 10. Freud has you laying on the couch and talking about your thoughts and feelings. So here we're going to talk about different types of insight therapies, talk therapies, so to speak. So we're going to talk about Freudian psychoanalysis. We're going to talk a little bit about group therapies. And these two we're really going to pit against each other, Freudian and humanistic. And then we'll talk a little bit about cognitive. But cognitive is a big part of this, so we might get to that later. So the first thing we want to talk about, well, a whole bunch here. Psychoanalysis. This is Freud. This is talking about your past. This is talking about your fears. This is you laying back on the couch. And in fact, in this video we're going to watch in class, Leonard is being asked the classic ink blot test, and that might be something that Freud would use in his psychoanalysis. So the psychodynamic theory, psychoanalysis, that is Freud, and it's you talking about, again, the things that we talked about, your past, we talk about your dreams, we talk about your earliest memories, all of those types of things in order to try to solve your problem. You know, there's not a lot of that going on now because there are more there are more scientific therapies that work in the shorter term, and we're going to talk more about that, especially cognitive behavioral therapy. But this really was the first kind of therapy we had, insight therapy. Now, Freud would say in psychoanalysis there might be something called resistance, and now remember, we had the unconscious mind, and as stuff starts to bubble up, we don't like it. We shut it down. We talked about ego defense mechanisms. That would be a form of resistance. It's like, I don't want this. And in fact, Freud, we talked about this in chapter 10 too. Freud would say, as soon as you want to quit therapy, what that means is we're really close to getting an answer. So the more you want to quit, the more you should stay, which, of course, that would be great because if somebody's writing the checks, then you never leave. If you want to stay, then you stay. If you want to leave, that means you really, really should stay. But that does make sense from Freud's perspective that if I'm touching something that's sore, if I'm getting really into some deep part of your psyche, you're not going to want me to touch it, and you're going to resist. You're going to push me away, and that's his theory. And he would also say in psychoanalysis that there's going to be a relationship between me and my therapist, and that eventually that relationship is going to mirror the problem relationships I've had in my past. So if I have a male therapist and I have a problem with my father, he would say, I'm transferring my feelings from my father to my therapist. I'm transferring my feelings for my spouse to my therapist. So transference was what you really wanted because that was the way that Freud would say we can really get to your problems, because then they could unpack the relationship between the analyst and the therapist instead of, the analyst and the patient instead of the person that the patient is having a problem with. One of the problems that they have is there's something called transference love, where a patient might believe that the love that they felt for their spouse or their father or whatever else, they're actually transferring onto the therapist, and he would say, we can't do that. We can use it, but a relationship between a therapist and a patient is absolutely out of the question, even after therapy is over. That's not something you can do. But again, the idea of transference is the feelings that I have for this other person during psychoanalysis, I will transfer onto my therapist, and that is called transference. And that was a good thing. That allowed an analyst to work with some stuff. Now we're going to talk about humanistic therapies. And remember, Freud, everything in the id was dark, it was violent, it was sexual, it was death, it was just all these things. And Carl Rogers said no. And really, when you want to think of Carl Rogers, the mnemonic is think of Mr. Rogers. And if you don't know who Mr. Rogers is, I feel really bad for you. You need to just look him up. He's one of the most decent people that's ever been in media and maybe even in America. Just a decent man. And Carl Rogers really looked for the decency inside of us. Freud looked for the darkness. Rogers looked for the decency, and he called it humanistic. Really treated us as whole beings, treated us like human beings, and he called it client-centered therapy. This is about you. This is about you, the patient. This is not about me, the therapist. So he said, and really think back, we got Maslow, self-actualization. We can get better. We can grow. We can self-actualize. Maybe it's our environment that's getting in the way, but all I'm going to do, and by the way, this is really an important distinction. I'm not going to move things out of the way for you. I'm going to help you move things out of the way for yourself. That is a humanistic therapy. Very positive, very client-centered, as it says right there. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different strategies that he used in his therapy. One of the first things that he used, and this video is in the way, but that's okay, is he called it reflection of feeling. And by the way, this is something that we use all the time. I think he developed this in the 50s. We still do that. So a person's talking, and I would say, so you'd tell me some things, and I'd say, so what I'm hearing you say is that you're frustrated with this other person. That's reflection of feeling. I'm holding a mirror up to you. I'm not solving your problems. I'm not telling you what I think. I'm saying this is what I'm hearing you say. I'm reflecting you the same way a mirror would reflect you. That is a reflection of feeling. That is one of the strategies Carl Rogers would use. And I cannot emphasize this enough. I've already said it like 5 times. But I don't have the answer as a therapist. You have the answer. All I'm helping you do is uncover your answer. He would also talk about, he would use unconditional positive regard. And we'll probably watch a video in class of Carl Rogers talking about it. I hope we have time. But he said, he would deal with some people who were heinous. They were South African police officers who were racist and supported apartheid, and they would come in for therapy. And he said, I had to really provide them with complete support, complete understanding, complete, and you see the word is unconditional. Conditional means I will support you under these conditions. And he said, nope. As a therapist, I have to give you unconditional positive regard. I have to care for you. I have to think that I'm trying to heal you no matter how terrible you've been. Now think about how powerful that might be for somebody who's never felt unconditional caring from a parent or a spouse or something like that. So how are you going to grow? Freud would say by being challenged. Rogers would say by being cared for, by being treated with complete positive regard. So think about it. I'm reflecting your feelings. Reflection of feeling from the previous slide. I am giving you positive regard. I'm caring for you no matter what you've done, no matter what you say, because I want you to heal. I'm not accepting the things you've done in the past. I'm just caring for you as a person and trying to help you heal. And as you can see, humanistic theories emphasize positive self-concept. Psychodynamic theories really are saying underneath, you're just kind of a gross person. But Carl Rogers was like Mr. Rogers, said, nope. And then we have group therapies. And when you think of group therapies, now I'm going to back up because we're not talking about like Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous, here's the deal, that we're going to talk about that later. They do not have a trained therapist in the room. This is just a bunch of alcoholics sitting around providing support for each other. This is a support group. Group therapy would be, I have a therapist in the room and multiple people around a circle. And one of the things, and this is one of the things that we talk about in class, is it works for depression and PTSD because what we get to hear is other people have similar problems as we do. So everybody in the room has depression, so we talk about it and we feel less alone. Everybody in the room has post-traumatic stress disorder, so we don't feel alone. And we also hear strategies of how people are getting better. So what they find is these group therapies, they work in often institutional settings. We might have them in prisons and places like this, where we have a therapist in the room, people around in a circle. It can be very effective for certain types of disorders. And then this is what we were talking about earlier, and this is the last one I'm going to talk about, self-help support groups. I have all caps. They're not run by a professional therapist. So if you see anonymous in it, Narcotics Anonymous, there are all kinds of anonymous groups. Those are simply a bunch of people who've been through the program and they are providing support for each other. They're not providing therapy the way you would in group therapy. They are providing support. And there's some research that says that they really help. It depends on what it's for. It depends on how they do it. But these are, again, talk therapies, insight therapies, group therapy. A trained counselor helps you. And self-help support groups is just people who've been through the process. They talk about their problems. They help you work through your problems. And I'm going to let Mr. Davis take over from here. I'm just a couple seconds over 10 minutes.